Good evening, everyone. So I want to greet everyone who is in the room as well as those who are joining us via live stream. We want to especially welcome our guest this evening, Reverend Dr. Danielle Buhuro. Danielle is a pastor, a CPE supervisor, a scholar, and an activist. And I've had the pleasure of knowing her for several years, since back in our seminary days. She has done some powerful work, not only in her chaplaincy, but also in the community, particularly in the area of gang violence. And thus, she has written the book, Is There a Heaven for a G? A Pastoral Care Approach to Gang Violence. And so we will start this evening out. We'll have some commentary from our own Reverend Dr. Joanne Terrell, who wrote the foreword to the book. We will have some commentary by Dr. Zach Moon, as well as Dr. Butler, and Dr. Buhuro will have some commentary herself, and then we will have a time of question and answer. When we do get to question and answer, we would ask you to go to the mic in the back of the room. Even though we are in an intimate space, there are those who are joining us via live stream, and they can only hear your questions if you speak into the mic. So we would ask that you would do that, and the mic is in the center aisle. All right? So with no further ado, I am going to turn this portion over to Reverend Dr. Joanne Terrell to say a few words, and then we will proceed from there.
Thanks be to God for this occasion, and thanks be to God for this pastor, and thanks be to God for this book, Is There a Heaven for a G? When I picked up the book to read it, in anticipation of writing the foreword, I really had not anticipated the ways that the book would trigger my own experience with gun violence, having lost my mother to gun violence when I was a teenager. And but it didn't take me back to the shock of that experience itself. What it took me back to was the home that I lived in following the death of my mother, and the lack of pastoral care, really, that I was given concerning that issue, that very issue of being a traumatized child. The implication was that I needed to get on with my life, that I needed to make myself useful to the church, that my mother was in hell, but I didn't have to go. If I could make myself useful. That was the implication. Those were unspoken words, but it was implied in every theological discussion I attempted to have with those who were around me. My uncle, a pastor, my aunt, a missionary, and all of the church members some of whom might have even had similar experiences. I'm not aware of them, but some of them might have had similar experiences, because it's not an uncommon thing, sadly, in America, for women to be killed in domestic violence situations. 1 in 4 women, I believe it is, are killed in those kinds of situations. And in the housing project where I lived with my mother before she died, at least 3 women that same year died in the same manner that my mother died. So when I picked up this book, Is There a Heaven for a G?, a book that attempts to charge the church with coming up with a pastoral care for those who are victims of violence, particularly gang violence, but who are victims of violence nevertheless, who need the assurance of pardon, who need the assurance that the love that the church proclaims is the province of its God, sometimes withholds from those who need it the most. And so I was so pleased to see this, my student and my pastor in many ways, to provide this out of her rich experiences as a chaplain and doing this very difficult work of ministering to families who have questions, ministering to friends who have questions, spiritual questions that pertain to our life together, and how we move forward through such things, and how we change the shape of things, and how we anticipate our God is with us. And so I'm very happy that we're here tonight. Thank you.
Dr. Buhuro, I want to say thank you for this book. As it turned out, this book had many gifts for me, and I just want to name those in this space, and certainly by way of commending this text to all of you. I'll say for me, as a pastoral theologian and a scholar who tries to work at the intersections of useful theology for real people and real circumstances, I found this book right on time in that kind of thing. And I'll say to you confessionally that there are pastoral theologians who write books that are not nearly as useful as this book. And part of, I think, the struggle for some folks in that situation is how can we truly reflect the human messiness of the ministry encounter, particularly in chaplaincy? And for those of you who have not yet had a chance to open the covers of this book, its author offers many different kind of genre access points to this, including taking you right there alongside her as she is doing her work. And there's time that feels like we're traveling right alongside with you. And I think that is often a challenge that many pastoral theologians find elusive to meet, because we try to talk about it too theoretically or too sort of up here, and I'm grateful that you have brought all of this, the many human faces that live in this work. As some of you may know, chaplaincy is work that's very dear to my heart, and there isn't all that much written by chaplains. Chaplains are kind of a misfit kind of bunch of folks sometimes. Sometimes these are the folks who couldn't hang in the church, or the church said, maybe God called you, but God didn't call you here. So why don't you just, find some other place to do ministry. And then there are some folks, and I believe that my colleague sitting here next to me is one of those, didn't end up there by accident, but recognizes the real, what I would claim as the very profound transformative power of the work that can happen in chaplaincy. And it sometimes happens in the strangest ways, the most unexpected ways, the ways that elude good seminary training, and demand a sense of humor and a readiness to be open-hearted in moments that, and with folks who maybe we wouldn't have expected. And so part of the gifted of this book is speaking truthfully some of those stories, and to me in a way that I found myself smiling. I found myself moved in the deepest parts of my heart. Remembering times where I've been walking down the corridor of a hospital. I've been stepping into somebody's ICU room, wondering what I might find there, being scared out of my mind, that I wouldn't be enough, and hoping and praying that God would be in that space and make sure that enough was possible. I'll also just share kind of one more piece of how this book was so particularly meaningful to me. A lot of my chaplaincy work has been with folks in the military, and there are so many points of resonance between thinking about what may compel a young person to be a part of a gang, hanging with the folks. What might be really deeply important to experience a sense of camaraderie, a sense of protection in the midst of danger, a sense of meaning. And there are many resonances with why people join the military. My time working with folks in the Marine Corps, some of these folks came straight from gang life to military life. I heard folks say, joining the military was natural for me because I had grown up around guns my whole life. And I think what folks, many folks that I worked with were looking for out of joining the military were things that maybe at a different chapter of their life they might have answered, they may have tried to seek out by finding themselves affiliated with a gang in their neighborhood. And so for me, I was also just hearing echoes of other folks that I've had an opportunity to know. And I think in sometimes there are ways that whether that comes from certain ideas that the church holds or other kind of societal norms that have ways of drawing lines that say these folks over here are heroes, but these folks over here are criminals. I sometimes wonder at those lines, and I wonder sometimes how quickly we want to redraft those lines when it turns out that the person who shoots those Dallas police officers turns out to be a veteran. And we wonder, what should we do with those lines that we drew in the sand? And is he a veteran, and is he a hero, or is he something else now? And, maybe he was affiliated with the new Black Panther Party, so maybe we actually meant to put him over here in this other box that says criminal on it, and maybe we didn't mean all that stuff about him being a hero anyway. And the arbitrariness of that, the tragedy of that, I think is work that the church needs to be about. It's work that I think is ministry. I appreciate the spiritual and moral and theological dimensions of that work and of those questions and the demands within it. And as I say, I hope you have a whole lot more work and a whole lot more energy in you, Dr. Buhuro, because you just started something, at least in my estimation. I know it comes from a lot of work, but my goodness, does it raise some very important questions, I think, for many of us to seek to meet you in these questions and to meet you in this work.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm so delighted that we have this opportunity to gather to celebrate the work of one of our graduates, a graduate who continues to work with us through the ministry of CPE. Many of our students benefit from her insights, and now more of us will benefit from her reflections through this book. Dr. Danielle J. Buhuro, and her book, Is There a Heaven for a G?, is a profoundly engaging, critical reflection on a social phenomenon that is devastating communities, violence. Felt most poignantly in Chicago as gang violence, this book urges its reader to cling to and claim life. Her reflection is prefaced and introduced by two distinct voices. The first voice speaks of the enduring pain experienced by an individual whose life has been ever changed by violence. The second voice recontextualizes our understanding of violence by transitioning violence from an individual experience to a systemic phenomenon. We must understand this and recognize that one person who is victimized by violence has siblings, parents, grandparents, check out the circles that are growing, aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, friends, and partners who all show up at the hospital raging for answers, raging for payback, just raging. In a memoir style, Dr. Buhuro guides the reader through an educational experience on the theology of pastoral care through the ministry of hospital chaplaincy, gripping the reader from her very first sentence. She proceeds to fuss, cuss, and even snot as she offers her theological anthropology that is rooted in seeing and being human. Through her experience as a chaplain, she reframes traditional theological pastoral care tenets. Rather than stressing the peace that passes all understanding, she stresses that we ought to remain aware of our anxiety. Instead of emphasizing a non-anxious presence, she says, demonstrate a non-judgmental presence, which is more culturally relevant. Dr. Buhuro stresses the importance of seeing the historical roots of our culture of violence. In this, she points us to the importance of not being reductionistic in our reflections on gang violence. We must understand the identity that is formed by violence and the importance of reforming identity for new life to occur. There were many places where I was moved in a variety of directions, but there is one thing that I would like to raise as a question for consideration tonight. I invite you to reflect with us on one of the points you raise. In your section on African enslavement, on page 60, you write, African enslavement also impacted our religious beliefs. We have a deep sense of spirituality, but we no longer have a loyal conviction to religion. This is why the black church is dying. The black church was once the hub of African American life, culture, and community. However, as we become more conscious of our African history, we find it increasingly difficult to reconcile the Christian church of our African ancestors with the Christian church of our white slave masters. This struck me because Africa today is one of the places where Christianity is growing. And it is growing not because of an African theology that is prompting folks to be converted. It's growing through a white evangelical Christianity that is taking the land. When I was there in Ghana this past December, there were major billboards advertising the many prominent American evangelical televangelists who were coming to Ghana to host major revivals. You name them, they're going there. So I'm wondering, as you talk about this change that is taking place here and recovering an African spirituality, but when we look at what's happening on the continent, they're taking over. So how do we really move ahead when we look at that reality? How do we move ahead with a sense of church here when white Christianity, as an evangelical expression, is what is moving black folk? And I'd even venture to say, when you talk to black evangelicals, they will point to Joyce and a whole lot of other folks faster than they'll point to black folk like Jeremiah Wright. So talk to us, Chaplain.
Yeah. First and foremost, let me say good evening. Let me say thank you so much for being present here to have this conversation this evening. I feel honored and humbled just to have the opportunity to sit at this table with three illustrious persons. I feel a sense of irony being able to sit at this table with also at least two persons who I caused major grief to many years ago during my Master of Divinity time here at Chicago Theological Seminary. So please know that I am humbled and honored to be here this evening. To answer Dr. Butler's first question, my concern, my huge concern, when we talk about gang violence and we specifically talk about persons who are affiliated with the gangs, my concern is the ways in which we have used religion to damn persons to hell. My concern is also in the ways in which we have used specifically the Christian faith tradition to evangelize and proselytize to persons who are affiliated with gangs. And so when I talk about the concern of where is the black church, it is understanding that I believe that the language of the black church has to change. I believe in some sense one of the reasons why our church is unfortunately dying is because we are no longer wanting to have what I call is a side-by-side empathic relationship with persons over there on the street corners. I believe that we are engaging in what I like to call is sexy, sophisticated, and seductive ministry. Not ministry that is dirty and muddy and a ministry that doesn't look cool and cute. And gang violence, for me, is one of those issues. It's not the environmental justice ministry. It's not the green team ministry. It is difficult. It is hard. And so my challenge in writing this is to challenge the church, in particular the black church, for the ways in which we have become invested in everything but issues of gang violence. And more so, to challenge the church, the Christian black church, to reflect on how we support an overall culture of violence, and we sit and we stay silent, because addressing issues of gang violence is not the sophisticated, cool ministry, if you will. It's not the type of ministry where you get speaking engagements around the world for. It's not the type of ministry where persons pour millions and thousands of dollars into. And so I really am challenging what I believe is the silence of the black church around this particular issue, and the ways in which the black church continues to remain quiet. I had an opportunity to sit down with me and other pastors. I had an opportunity to sit down with the mayor, Rahm Emanuel, in light of the Department of Justice report regarding the Laquan McDonald shooting. And the mayor called about 20 pastors from area churches in the city to come and talk about the findings. And he said, first of all, no recordings, no cameras, no cell phones, no recordings, no tapings. And we're just going to have a talk. And what was interesting to me is after he talked for about 30, 45 minutes about the DOJ's findings, he then looked at all of the clergy, all of the pastors who were in the room, and he says, I'm a Jewish person, he says, and I have a rabbi. He says, and let me tell you, he says, if something like gang violence was impacting Jewish young boys and girls, if 900 or so Jewish boys and girls were shot and killed in 1 year, he said every rabbi would be in the streets crying foul. And while we took some issue with the mayor saying that, because that didn't take into consideration systemic issues of poverty and unemployment, at some point, all of the clergy in the room had to scratch their heads and say, yes, how is it that you have almost 900 African-American boys and girls killed in 2016, and the black church is not raising holy hell about that? And so in some ways, I do believe that the black church is on trial, standing before jurors and getting ready to be found guilty and being handed the death penalty for all the ways in which the black church has decided to look at other issues except for gang violence in our communities.
And I think that the black church has a theological problem. Certainly there are other problems, a problem of compassion fatigue, maybe, problem of protracted trauma visited upon us day in and day out, and never having a chance to catalyze that in any kind of meaningful way. But the theological problem is what Dr. Butler was pointing to. The evangelicalism of the black church is uninterrogated. And what evangelicalism as the civil religion of America has bequeathed to us is, the abreaction to evangelicalism, fundamentalism, has really kind of hijacked the good news out of evangelicalism. The evangel is gone from evangelicalism. The evangel, the good news to the poor and the oppressed, is not just all around good news, it's good news to the poor and the oppressed that is the evangel. But it's gone from evangelicalism, which seeks to morally level all of us, make every infraction of social mores as well as whatever we find universally relevant, such as the issue of murder, make all of these the same thing, and make individual salvation at the heart of its message rather than social transformation, which is what good news to poor and oppressed people is calling for. And so I think very strongly that that the evangelicalism of the black church has to be interrogated. The fundamentalism that we've inherited has to be interrogated, and certainly whether or not we can, as the black church, pull away from those moorings and establish our own agenda to save our people, not from their personal sins. That's what a community is for, to help individuals to to find impetus for transformation, but to save people from the forces that are arrayed against us in power, in numerical authority, in financial authority, all the ways in which the systems are arrayed against black folk. Do we have a way to be not only countercultural, but can we be counter the whole system in which we are trying to navigate our beings, in which we're trying to live in the face of all of the bloodlust that is against our community?
Well, it seems that we are open for questions from the floor. To the mic, please.
I'm Reverend Oscar Creer, and I stand as a CPE certified pastor, writer on this particular subject, and I'm so glad to be here. I think part of our problem is that what is discussed in academia, like we're sitting here right here, never gets to the road. The rubber doesn't get to the road. Because the average pastor has not done CPE. The average pastor is so busy competing with other pastors for numbers that whenever we get together, whether it's an AME conference, whether it's a Baptist convention, whether it's a Church of God in Christ convention, social justice never gets to the table. It never gets to the table. My question is, how do we get this book and other books like this into the heads of the average? I preach about 20, 25 traumatic death funerals a year. I work for a funeral home. And I keep hearing the same question that the title of your book asks. These mamas and sisters and brothers want to know, when I get through hallelujah and down here, because I'm the father of 4 G's, raised them right there on the corner of 65th and Rhodes, from 1999 to 2004, when that was a real expensive drug corridor. So my question, I guess, for conversation is, how do we get what is discussed in this room into the conversations of the people that are actually out there who will stand at a gangster's funeral and say, he that live by the sword shall die by the, that just makes my skin crawl when I see this poor mother sitting here hurting. And so how do we do this?
I think first and foremost, I think the question that we have to continue to challenge our ministerial colleagues with is, what type of ministry do we want to engage in, right? What I mean by that is I have taken, my church, I have taken the tough call to do what I call is Jordan River type ministry. What is Jordan River type ministry? Jordan River type ministry is a phrase that we use at our church, Lincoln Memorial, which is located in the Woodlawn neighborhood on 64th and Champlain. I was always, as a child, perplexed about the story of Jesus' baptism in the Jordan River by John the Baptist. And what perplexed me about that is whenever I would open up my children's Bible, there would always be a picture of a Jesus that had this clean, crisp, beautiful blue water that he was being baptized in, with the cute little dove above his head, and then a picture of the skies opening. And it wasn't until I got to seminary and started studying what the Jordan River really looks like that I learned that the Jordan River is dirty, it's muddy, it's not crystal clear. And then it became apparent for me how I understand Jesus' baptism. Jesus' baptism, for me, is theologically symbolic of doing ministry that's dirty, that's muddy, that's not popular, that's not cute. And so I think it first takes us as people of faith, clergy persons, really grappling with psychologically, what type of ministry do we feel we are called to? What type of ministry do we feel like we are engaged in? And being open and honest to say, I don't believe every pastor, every clergy person can handle this type of ministry. In an ideal world, I would like to say this is all ministry that we should be, could be engaging in. But this ministry is hard. This ministry is difficult. Maybe it's more easy to start a green team and invest the church in creating a solar panel roof. Maybe that's easier for some, right? Because this ministry is more difficult. This ministry is more challenging. And so I think it's also us having to be sensitive to that. I may not necessarily believe that the answer or the solution is grounded in the black church. So maybe that's some pushback that I want to give, given the fact that I do question the relevancy of the church. I believe that this is a type of ministry, if you will, that's going to start from other persons, maybe persons outside the church, such as what Dr. Moon was referring to as maybe chaplains, maybe social activists. I wonder if this type of ministry is going to happen from persons who are not in the church, from persons who are not ordained clergy. And so that is my pushback.
And perhaps persons who are not Christian but embrace other faiths.
What she says on page 33, church pastors sometimes have a tendency to say all the wrong things. In my line of work, we sometimes despise church pastors. They have difficulty sitting in place or places of pain and being quiet. Most church pastors need to fill the space with empty cliches and inappropriate Bible passages. Yeah, I'm speaking directly to what you're saying by reading from what she has had to say. Mm-hmm. One of the ways I've tried to address this concern is by requiring that all of our Master of Divinity students go through Introduction to Pastoral Care before they enter CPE. And so they are given the foundation of the tenets and being encouraged to not speak too much, not rely on platitudes and inappropriate text, but to be prepared to be in that space where they learn how to be with folks. And as Dr. Buhuro was emphasizing in the book, to maintain humanity and to address folks as human beings.
Marva Coleman, MDiv student. Thank you for this book. And maybe I'll get my paper done because I can help use this on my constructive theology paper. So thank you for this.
Thank you.
It's my topic. It saddened me to hear what you said about the gathering of the meeting with the mayor. No recordings, no video cameras, pictures, etc. To me, I think it should have been a transparent, open meeting where pastors and whoever attended could actually express what they thought and how they could work on this issue. It hurt me and saddened me to hear him say that his pastors, or forgot the word that they use. Yeah, they're rabbis, would be up in arms about their children being killed by gang violence, et cetera, because the mayor has a different position, and he is over the total city. And church people and ministry is a part of the city. And to me, I think he has a responsibility to pull church members together and his Jewish friends and all to work on this issue. And that's where I see him. I see him being aloof at this problem that is tremendously serious in the city of Chicago. And could you speak more about perhaps what you felt that he could do to help, or what were the pastors saying in the meeting, that what kind of help they needed, or how can he get more police maybe to solve some of these problems?
Yeah, the irony was he later went into discussing how so many churches have received money from the mayor's office and taken that money and used that money to start sexy and seductive ministries without addressing gang violence. And so he held many churches accountable for the ways in which they have received financial resources from him and chosen other forms and other types of ministries. I wish, you're saying you're sad, I'm sad, because I wish the same rage that we showed in the last 48 hours for a Facebook video of a gentleman shooting an elderly man live on Facebook, I wish the same way my news feed was blowing up about that, I wish my news feed would blow up in that same way every time an African-American young boy or girl was killed as a result of gang violence. And so for me, my concerns become what we are prioritizing as concerns versus other issues, subjects, and topics that we've grown complacent with. My concern also is the current culture of violence that we're living in and how we support the current culture of violence. For example, I never thought I would see the day when a country would elect a president that said it's okay to grab women by a particular body part. I never thought I would see the day where if I walked past a particular political rally, I could see signs saying, "Trump that tramp," or "Hillary Clinton is a bitch, a whore, and a slut." I never thought the America that I live in would elect a presidential a presidential nominee of that caliber, but America did. I never thought I would see the day when the highest ranking movies in our culture today highlight violence and we say nothing about it. Fast and Furious, The Godfather, movies such as this, and we remain quiet. I never thought I would see the day when even the type of music that is played on the radio highlights violence and we say absolutely nothing about it, right? Even in terms of our social media. What can be said on social media, we've grown complacent to. What can be recorded on social media, we've grown complacent to. Even the challenge we have, talking about the church, where we gloss over all of the violence in our quote-unquote good book every Sunday morning. We gloss over how Hagar was beaten by Sarah. We gloss over how, even in our good book, we celebrate the Exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt, but we never talk about all of the lives lost when the Red Sea parted. Even how this past Easter or Resurrection Sunday, the crucifixion is itself a very violent dilemma, and we don't talk about that. And so for me, my sadness is all the ways in which we currently live and support a culture of violence, and then we are somehow bewildered when persons who are affiliated with gangs decide to go out and shoot and kill each other.
Well, I'm just amazed at how they found the Boston killer out of thousands of people that were present. But it seems that we cannot solve one problem in this city, one gang. We can't find anyone who has killed another person. It seems to me that police work needs to be stepped up.
Or the ways in which we found $1 million to support war funding. We found $1 million to support war funding, but we're still looking for money for clean water in Flint, Michigan. Right. We're still looking for money to give to the Chicago public school system. We depend on a rapper to give $1 million to our Chicago public school system, right? My pushback also against the black church is that we are more interested in building cathedrals than doing ministry. Building huge edifice to come and worship once a week on Sundays than doing ministry. And so, yes, I have several challenges about, first and foremost, our priorities and what our psychology tells us to focus on when we talk about ministry.
Thank you for raising these issues. We really need to delve into them more. Thank you.
I just wanted to, the point that got raised about academia and kind of how do we find ourselves in this predicament? And I would like to say that I think the academy is implicated in this predicament. And I think that if those of us who come to work here to teach classes, to shape ministers and inform and strengthen ministers, if we don't see our sense of responsibility in this, I think we may be assuming some unjust naivete. And I would say that, part of this is, as it pertains to a book like this, do we see this as being a valuable resource to engage with students in our class? And I think I have heard from certain scholars that a book like this would not be regarded for an academic discussion because, after all, there are not enough footnotes to justify itself as worthy of consideration. And therein lies part of the problem, that we find ourselves more concerned with certain points of reference and neglect and avoid and deny and marginalize other points of reference, because this book is filled with points of reference that are authoritative. But there are those in the academy who would not see it as such. And so I think part of the question if we mean to steer the ship in a different direction has to do with rethinking what do we claim as being authoritative sources to engage this kind of work in an educational context, particularly one that is concerned with the training of ministers. As I hear some of these critiques of what's happening in the church and what's happening with ministry and where some of those motivations and practices lie, I mean, I'm thinking about seminary classes. I'm thinking about what got said about ministry that allowed folks to leave their education thinking a big old edifice was reason to get out of bed in the morning, and somebody's child dying in the street, well, maybe tomorrow, we'll have regard for that. And I'm not a part of the religious community that claims our mayor as a member, but what I would have said to his face had I been at that meeting is, your children are dying in the street. And how dare you say that the rabbis would be in the street when their children were dying? And this comes back to this question of where have we decided to draw these lines? And if the mayor is saying to you, well, these are your children because, after all, the color of their skin says they are not like me, they are not my children, my answer would be, how dare you? Not only because of your civic duty to oversee all things, as you say, in the city, but if we're going to have this be a conversation that claims religion and claims theology, how dare you say that you're talking about anyone other than children who belong to this family?
Thank you, Dr. Buhuro, for your text, as well as our panelists for the discussion. And my name is Melanie, and I'm really interested in this conversation that we kind of just circled around violence, particularly because I'm interested in the claiming of a warrior sensibility or spirit as a means of resistance. And part of what I see as valuable from gangsta or virtuous, from gangsta life or culture, is this sense of desire to claim territory, to claim, particularly in a space that says you have nothing, you will be nothing, to claim orientation to groups in a world that says you are nobody, right? To say that I am a GD, BD, Vice Lord, so forth, right? I'm really, but my question really is about, is it the sense that gangster culture is disordered violence? Would we be more apt to affirm gangster or gangster life or culture if it was attacking the empire? You know, if its target was something that was of social upheaval in our world? And is there a possibility to reclaim gangster life and culture? Rather, as I see you, your text saying, how do we care for, but is it a possibility to also nurture and call something virtuous within the culture itself?
I think, let me say first, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to say something that's controversial, in addition to saying damn and fuck in a book. I'm going to say something controversial. I think there is, in some ways, the church is unconsciously frustrated with gangs. I think pastors and ministers are unconsciously jealous of gangs because gangs do something that the church has not been able to do in a long time, and that's evangelize. I think in some ways we are unconsciously, subconsciously frustrated and angry because while the numbers in the church are going down, gang membership is increasingly going up. And persons are choosing gang culture before religion and spirituality. And so I think that, first and foremost, I think that that's a concern that we really wrestle with unconsciously. I think also there are ways in which I believe gangs are able to do something that the church is not. In addition to gaining membership, I believe that gangs are able to provide love in ways in which the church has not been able to do in the last few years. And so I believe the empire, if you will, that gangs are really attacking is the Christian church. That is within itself the quote-unquote institution that gangs are attacking. Religion, spirituality, and faith. And so I think, to be honest with you, I think us as a Christian church community, we don't know what to do with that. And that is intrinsically what we wrestle with, so to speak.
Dr. Buhuro, thank you. Thank you for this talk and for the book. But as one who has lost my father to violence, I thank you for lifting up those who remain and the care of those who remain. And you mentioned that and it was mentioned the words that are spoken often in the church and the ways in which those are not helpful. I'm wondering if you could speak also to the issues of post-traumatic stress within the family and the youth that remain after the violence that we are experiencing.
What we've discovered when we look at gangs and we look at gang violence, what we discovered is we thought initially if you give persons jobs, then they won't want to be in a gang. And we discovered that that's wrong. That's why I do not support these new initiatives that say give persons jobs and then they won't be in gangs. I believe intrinsically that the issue is one of love, in that gang members experience a love, a loyalty, a care, and a support. And so even if you took away, so to speak, all of the social ills, poverty, unemployment, lack of adequate housing, I believe if you don't address and look at the ways in which gangs love persons, then we still haven't attacked the true nature of gang violence, right? There's a new organization named the PICO organization that's been able to convince many local area clergy, churches, and pastors that if we give jobs and create jobs in our churches, then that will deter persons from gang membership. And I don't believe that that's really attacking the root of the problem. How do we create mentorship programs? How do we walk alongside persons and begin to create familiar relationships that invest time, energy, care, and love to persons? I think that is central to this. Even if you give a gang member a job, they're still in the gang. And that's what we, I think, are not grappling with or not understanding. I know much of the book, the central topic is gang violence, but I think this book is also important, as Dr. Moon said, to think about chaplaincy and anxiety that persons in chaplaincy feel. And so I also would invite you to also think about the work of chaplaincy is very difficult, and being a CPE student is very difficult. And so I think that this book is also a great primer for persons to read before taking CPE. And so, interestingly enough, this book has been selling like hotcakes in the Association of Clinical Pastoral Education, because persons are picking it up more for the reasons of thinking about how do I prepare myself for hospital ministry. So I also want to add that too. Also, the second largest contingent that's been buying this book, which really shocked me, is sociology departments. What does that mean? What does that mean when Amazon reports to me that University of Chicago School of Social Work is buying this book like hotcakes, right? When clearly I wrote it for a religious circle. What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? I think that also challenges us and forces us to really think about some dynamics and issues.
Well, congratulations on all the places it's selling like hotcakes.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And there are copies of the book available in the back, and maybe they'll sell like hotcakes here too.
Thank you.
We do thank you for your presence here this evening. We thank you for the work that you've done, and we encourage you to continue doing the work that you're doing. And we want to also affirm what Dr. Moon has said, that this is only the first installment.
Thank you.
We look
Thank
for
you.
more books, and we also look forward to having our students be better prepared come from here to go to you because they have read this book in
Thank you.
advance.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.